Yes, and am I a good distance away?
There we are. All right. This is good. Thank you. My apologies. We are on the air, and this is Community Matters. Getting off to a bit of a rocky start. My fault. Sorry. This is your host, Becky Steinbrunner, and I have the great honor today of having Miss Jillian Greenside here in the studio with me. For those of you who don't know her, she is one of the best examples of a true community activist and really walks the talk. You know, it's easy to complain about things, but to get into the trenches and really do your very best, an exemplary example you are, Jillian Greenside. Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the heart of the matter of why I asked you to be on here today?
Well, thank you, Becky. That's a very kind introduction and stands out from the sort of vitriol I've been getting on social media, but we'll get to that a bit later. Bit about me. I've been in Santa Cruz now for 50 years this year.
Wow.
Which is amazing to me. And I worked at the university for 30 years and developed and was in charge of rape prevention education, and also worked in the community in similar issues and was one of the co-founders of the city's Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women.
Wow, thank you.
So I've done quite a bit of that work also in our 3 African countries since I retired from the university. So that is still very much part of my concern and activism. And I've been sort of involved with local politics since the early 80s. And if you like, keeping an eye on the issues that the City Council addresses and their policies.
Thank you.
And perhaps mostly I've got a reputation, I guess a good one for those who love trees, not so good with those who like to cut them down, in trying to preserve our, particularly our big trees. And this was before we even recognised that trees are rather important in this day and age with global warming. They take in our carbon dioxide and give us oxygen, so that's a pretty important
and help keep us cool
relationship. But we tend to cut them down. Sometimes trees have to come down, sometimes they come down unexpectedly, but mostly we are pretty cavalier. I won't say just as a Santa Cruz, really globally, about clear cutting our forests to our detriment. So I've been involved in Santa Cruz in those issues, and we'll segue to the topic of the day, most recently with the Santa Cruz Wharf, although I did spend the year as a member of the civil grand jury, and that's all public now because the grand jury made recommendations. There were 9 reports, and
amazing.
2 of them concerned the city of Santa Cruz, and the city basically rejected all of the recommendations, and that has to do with affordable housing. So, that's a different topic, but it's related to, I think, a lack of transparency on the part of our local city government. So I'll pause there.
I agree.
That's quite a bit.
Well, first of all, I want to say that every time in downtown Santa Cruz, I go past that beautiful Eucalyptus physifolia that has the brilliant orange flowers down near the Water Street end of the Front Street area. I always think of you and thank you, because I know you had quite a lot to do with that not being cut down during the 5-story development that is there now. That has always been one of my favorite trees. And I've heard you speak many times at planning commission meetings, city council meetings, and you're always very well spoken, very well informed, and very respectful.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for that.
I think that also comes with a bit of age. I perhaps, in the early days, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I was a little bit, more outraged. I'm still, I can be outraged, but I don't have to show that outrage. I think people listen more if the facts are presented. I'm not quite sure that the tree you describe, you mean the one where they're going to build the hotel on, it's Soquel? I'm trying to think of one on Water Street.
It's actually at the it's probably Mission Street at that point. You pass going from the river.
You mean the one where they built some high-rise apartments?
Swenson's.
Actually, because I don't like to take credit where other people have done the work. If it's the one we're thinking of, right next to those apartments that are at the head of Pacific Avenue.
Yes.
Yes, no, actually... we should thank our city arborist Leslie Keedy and arborist James Allen for working to at least preserve some of that tree.
Yeah.
But that would have gone had they not really tried to save it, because it was one of the trees when Leslie Keedy, our city urban forester, city arborist, does her annual big heritage tree tour of downtown. That was always a showpiece. And then, of course, with the apartments being built, and just to be on this issue for a moment, we have an ordinance that says that you can only take down a heritage tree if a project design cannot be altered. Not whether you want to alter it, cannot be altered.
Wow.
Well, obviously they could have altered it to save that tree, but we have a planning department that does not implement that ordinance. But Leslie and James Allen worked to preserve it. It's a bit scrunched in there, but by golly, that would look different without that beautiful tree. So, I'll take credit for work that I did, but they did the work on that one.
Well, thank you. Thank you for setting the record straight on that one with me. I have always thought it must be your work because you're always there working to save the trees, and I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And we have lost so many.
Yes.
So many.
Yes.
And,
Well, thank you for your work on the grand jury. I will invite you back for another program just about that and the findings and what is happening and not. I think it's a very salient point right now, given that the mayor has just announced a new $96 per parcel petition drive and transfer tax. So we'll have you back and talk more about that.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you. So for today, what I really want you to be able to talk about is the wharf, the Santa Cruz Wharf. There's all kinds of finger pointing, as we know, going on December 23rd. 150 feet of it fell off, and miraculously no one was injured. But now it comes down to, is it going to be rebuilt? Whose fault is it? Maybe that it fell apart. And you are getting, in my opinion, very unfairly and unjustly singled out as causing delays. So I want you to tell our listening audience, what is the truth here?
Thank you very much, Becky, for the opportunity. Yes, it started with a press conference from when the city manager alluded to the lawsuit, and I'll give some background on that, as being, he said at that point, responsible for the delay, that this wouldn't have happened without the lawsuit. And the mayor, and this surprised me, was nodding in agreement. And so the outfall from that, and this is the worst of social media on Nextdoor, was real nastiness. I welcome people having a different opinion, but many of the opinions, not all, many of them were based on no information, but they very quickly started saying very hostile things towards me personally, not just the group that I was a part of, Don't Morph the War, but to me personally. And then somebody on X, formerly Twitter, impersonated me.
Wow.
With a short biography. He got one thing quite wrong, but he was impersonating me and saying really inflammatory things as though it was coming from me. And people reposted that on Nextdoor, on Reddit. And so it very quickly, it's like a fire. It bursts and gets out of control.
Yeah.
And there's on social media, there's very little way to extinguish it. Anyway, that was the unfortunate part. I did write an op-ed for the Sentinel.
It was very good.
Many people appreciated because it set the record straight. I sort of expect members of the public, based on little or no information, will say things like, oh, it was the fault of a lawsuit. It surprised me, coming from our top leaders in the city. It seems to have settled down a bit, and I appreciated the words of the city's risk manager at the last meeting, and I only read this in the newspaper, in the Sentinel, where the city risk manager cautioned to stop the finger pointing, I'm paraphrasing, until we get all the facts.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been a very good beginning for the city manager and the mayor to have started with.
Absolutely.
Not to point fingers. I certainly could understand the motivation to find scapegoats, but it does not, I think, reflect well on our top leaders that they started to do that. And so I think ultimately we'll find out what the reason was for the failure, and once we find out the reason, then I guess discussions will begin about what to do about the end of the wharf. My hope is that it will be a community decision.
Yes.
Because the original wharf master plan was not a community decision. Yeah. That was imposed on the community. Oh, they had some stakeholders, but the community, including myself, was totally unaware of this $1.2 million wharf master plan that included, I won't go into everything that was going, and most of it is going to go in the wharf, included at the time, 45 feet tall buildings, and with stuff on top of that, that's like 50 feet.
Oh my
That's like
goodness.
a 5-story building. Not
Yeah.
that there would be stories in it, but that was the height. 3 of them on the wharf.
Wow.
And back when that first, I came across it by accident. I was at a Parks and Recreation Commission meeting for something else, and the consultant, the design firm from San Francisco that was given the money to produce the wharf master plan, had a little scale model and presented it to the commissioners. And I'd never forget his words. There were many words, but one of them was, as he showed, a PowerPoint of the wharf, this is Gilda's. We won't call it ugly, but we could do a lot better. Well, there were others in the audience who also, like me, were a long-time patron of Gilda's. We were appalled at this sort of dismissal of our beloved restaurant. So I got up and said a few words of public comment, but mostly the point is community was unaware of this transformation of the wharf.
Yeah.
And there's a lot beyond that. The city tried to get away by doing a negative declaration, which anybody who's been involved in project development by the city, you do a negative declaration for maybe a new sidewalk or something minor. This was a major transformation of a historic, iconic structure, pretty defining for the Santa Cruz city. And they weren't going to do a full environmental impact report.
That's shocking.
So a few of us, just talking like you do, in your neighbourhood and on the phone, like, what's going on here? And out of that, the people who were appalled, we grouped into the group called Don't Morph the Wharf. We went through the years of commenting. We got a lawyer. We paid $700. We raised the money for a legal letter saying you can't just do a negative declaration for this project. It has to be an environmental impact report.
Yeah.
And the city attorney says, out of an abundance of caution, he said at the council meeting, we will do an EIR. Well, good, but it took the public to raise money to have a lawyer point out what you should have done in the first place. So that started the process. And with a couple of years of their doing their environmental impact report, it was easy to spot the fudges, the lack of real analysis of the environmental impacts. Had they done a proper environmental impact report, we wouldn't, there would have been no lawsuit at all. So when people jump up and down, it was the lawsuit that delayed their doing this and that. Well, why was there a lawsuit?
Yeah.
There was only a lawsuit because the city didn't listen to the public and it did a inadequate, illegal environmental impact report. So it's sort of pointing the finger at the wrong direction. But the city staff are still saying, that without the lawsuit we would have done things that would have strengthened the wharf. That is not accurate.
Yes.
Without a lawsuit, there's no way that the delay for the lawsuit, which was necessitated because of their inadequacies, the delay would not, if we had no lawsuit, we wouldn't have had all of the 40-foot building at the end of the wharf and the landing for 200-ton vessels and the western walkway. That wouldn't have been built by the date that the end of the wharf collapsed. I mean, on every level, their pointing the finger was misplaced and inaccurate and unfair.
Yes, I agree. Now, this wharf master plan was done in 2014?
No, it was floated around 2014 and 15. The city applied for money from the federal government. I think most people would agree inappropriately because on their grant application, the public record shows on their grant application they claimed that the wharf was, quote, severely damaged in the tsunami of 2011. Well, the wharf suffered no damage from the tsunami of 2011.
And that was verified by experts.
By the engineering.
Yes.
The engineering study of every one of the 4,500 pilings under the wharf.
Wow.
And the conclusion in the engineering report is, although the harbour suffered a lot of damage, the wharf was undamaged. Quote, so how does that happen without any scrutiny that the city can falsify a grant application? And then they got the money, they put some in of their own, so they got almost $1 million from the Federal Department of Commerce. They augmented it with money from Parks and Recreation. So for $1.2 million, that's when the design firm from San Francisco drew up the wharf master plan. And the good part was they also did an engineering report. So all of those pilings were inspected underwater by divers, and their conclusion was that the wharf overall was in good condition, which they attributed to careful maintenance for the past century. And 5% of the pilings were in poor condition, 5%. And most of those were there were 3 areas, and there's a map online. You can look at, they pinpointed with dots where each piling needed replacing. The roadway has about a third of them. Under the demolished Miramar restaurant, many of the pilings were damaged there, and at the end of the wharf. So those were the 3 areas that needed attention. there were almost none under the current restaurants. And that becomes relevant when they're clamouring for a lowered west side walkway would save the restaurants, but that's another story. So they knew that, the city knew that in 2014, exactly which pilings needed replacing. Now their story is that they say, well, their story is that they couldn't get money to do that work without having a finalised environmental impact report and wharf master plan. So that's how they turn it around and point at us, the community group. See, if you hadn't filed a lawsuit, we would have had an approved plan because you filed the lawsuit after the plan was voted on. So it's your fault. Otherwise, we would have done all this work. Well, there's two, I think, well, first of all, you could question whether the work would have been done. But the second point is in the lawsuit, at our request, Don't Wharf the Wharf, the community group's request to the judge, it was it's written in the writ, that we asked the judge to ensure that all maintenance work could proceed during the lawsuit, and that is written in the writ. So there was nothing stopping the city replacing the pilings that needed replacing, including the ones at the end of the wharf. So the city comes back and says, well, yes, but we couldn't get money without an approved EIR. Well, yes, they could, because they got money for the demolished Miramar pilings. They obtained $1 million from the federal government. Jimmy Panetta, or maybe it was his, stand-in, was there. They had a little ceremony and, thanked the federal government for supplying the money. So one would think if they could get it for under the Miramar, about the same number of pilings at the end of the wharf, which arguably is a more vulnerable spot, they could have got it for the end of the wharf. So I think logic, facts demonstrate that they're pointing the fingers at a community group is shielding themselves from taking any responsibility or criticism, and I don't think it stands up.
No. Yes, I agree. Why do you think they tried to get money for replacing the pilings at the end of the wharf and maybe were not given the money because of their dishonesty, I'll say it forthrightly, over claiming the wharf had been damaged in the tsunami?
I don't think so, because I don't think the federal government knows that was one could say fraudulent grant application.
I would say that.
I don't think they know that. And maybe they deflected them. Who knows? I don't. Yeah. I try to keep speculation to a minimum. Yes. I like facts better. But if they actually tried to apply for money, if I was in charge of the wharf and everything, and was in the city staff, I'd be saying, well, boy, we better get this fixed at the end of the wharf. It might be a little while before we get an EIR approved, and we can go ahead. Let's do it. Sending out grant applications. So if the city showed us in the public record, we tried 5 grant applications and everyone said no. That is very different than claiming, putting out the narrative that, well, we just couldn't get funding without it. Well, obviously they did for the ones under the Miramar, and you could make a more compelling case for the ones at the end. So I'm sceptical that they even tried, because I think part of the dilemma here, the people who are now sort of in charge of the wharf is the Economic Development Department. Yes. Now, the wharf is under Parks and Recreation, but the people running the show, and that was clear at all of the public hearings, it was Economic Development that was giving their hour-long presentation with some very questionable facts, about how the wharf was in the red. Well, they admitted, if you include the Marine Rescue Unit, The wharf is in the red, meaning we have to economically develop it. Well, those of us sitting in the audience, we'd put it in writing, but it made no difference. We asked the mayor, please don't let the manager of this project keep saying inaccurate things. The Marine Rescue Unit is under the fire department. It's sort of like saying, if I add my next door neighbour's property taxes, my bank account is just drained. I mean, it's absurd.
Yes.
That you would do that. It's manipulation, and that's been frustrating the whole way through. It has not been an honest, sort of debate or whatever's. What was your? Now I've got so many deep into these facts. I've forgotten the initial question. I know it was about whether they could get the money. Oh no, I'm back on track. I think the problem is, it seems to those of us who followed this so closely, it's sort of been. I'd rather be at the beach type of thing. Yeah. That under economic development, the whole focus is making it, first of all, gentrifying it.
Yes.
And making it, they think, more of a money maker. Eco tours in the big new landing at the end, etc., etc. Whereas the public's voice was clear. Please don't change it. We love its sort of working class fishing atmosphere. Yes. But under economic development, I'm curious, I won't speculate too much, but I'm curious whether the need to replace the pilings at the end even sort of was on their radar. They're so focused on this wharf master plan, which has huge new additions to the wharf. Yes. Apart from the 40-foot, they lowered it to 40 feet tall buildings, 3 of them. There's a whole lot of other stuff that they were intent on doing, which they think will bring in more money. Now, of course, they changed the narrative. Now, that stuff they're going to add was essential for the stability of the wharf.
Oh, no.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's that is a mind-boggling evasion of the truth, because, and that came out from the retired wharf supervisor who put out, there's going around on the TV channels and YouTube, is his statement that if we'd had the West Side Walkway, it's a lowered walkway, 8 feet down, running under the current restaurant, so that's sort of halfway down the wharf, nowhere near the end. No. And he's saying that plus the East Side Walkway, which they're going to do that, but that won't be done for 5 years or more. That if those could have been there, except for that pesky lawsuit, the wharf would have been stable. Well, that's nonsense, and it's nonsense on 2 levels. Yeah. Because when the Wharf Master Plan first came out, and all of us were talking. We hadn't yet formed a group, but there were so many long-time locals and people who were born here and people who love the wharf. Everyone's like, what? What are they doing? Yeah. So I like to meet with the people that we're up against rather than just gossip about them. Right. So I met with the then wharf supervisor, who's now the retired wharf supervisor, who's spreading this story that if only we had done that. And we had a very amicable conversation. He showed me a lot of photographs of the history of the wharf. We met in his office on the wharf and went back and forth, and he was very much in favour of the Wharf Master Plan. And towards the end of our, about an hour's conversation, I said, well, what about this lowered walkway? Because I knew a lot of people thought that was a huge mistake, including, wharf crews who have to look after, maintain all this. And he said, well, that was an idea of one of the staff of the Coastal Commission. It's for greater access, and it really could go. Now, I'm quoting him, and I left feeling, oh, that's a bright spot, maybe it will go. But as soon as we started to sort of suggest that could go or we don't like it, then it became essential for the wharf's stability and essential for fighting fires on the wharf.
Oh.
I mean, it was just one piece of nonsense after another that wasn't based in fact. It was just pushback, make something up. And that went on and on throughout the whole process. And obviously, we did win the lawsuit because the city was at fault.
Yeah.
And that seems to get lost in all of this.
Yes, doesn't it, though?
The city was at fault. They didn't do the right thing. Had they done the right thing? No, nobody I know likes to, unless you may be, Rudy Giuliani or whatever. Do you like to have a lawsuit or wage a lawsuit? There would have been no lawsuit had the city studied the impacts properly and adopted the environmentally superior alternative from their own EIR.
Yes.
I mean, that's sloppy.
Yes.
I can't believe it. And they paid a small fortune for their secret attorney based out of Sacramento who was at every meeting. We couldn't afford to have our attorney at every meeting. We just sat through the meetings and gave our 3 minutes, and that was it. But city spent a lot of money to defend the indefensible.
Oh, my. If you're just joining us, welcome. This is Community Matters. My name is Becky Steinbruner, and I have the great privilege of having Miss Jillian Greenside here in the studio with us, talking with us today about the truth behind the wharf collapse and now the finger pointing, saying that it was because of delays caused by the lawsuit of a group that she was with of everyday citizens who just care a lot about the wharf, called Don't Morph the Wharf. And you collected the money to hire the attorney. You had an excellent attorney.
Yes.
She, I've been told, never takes a case that she doesn't know she can win.
No, we were very fortunate, and we wouldn't have done it had she not said, this is an excellent case to win. We wouldn't have, we're not fools. But just to clarify one thing, Becky, that we don't know yet why the end of the wharf collapsed.
Yes.
We know, finger pointing that it was the lawsuit, that's BS.
Yeah.
But we don't, that will come from the investigation, and whether it was faulty workmanship by the consultants or, I keep hearing that this was the biggest swells we've had in history. I find that hard to believe. I'd like to see some data on that. I know Big Boy Stagnaro, when he was alive, and I'd be at Gilda's and it was a stormy winter's day, and I'd say, oh, look at the waves. He'd say, Jill, you should have been here in the 40s. The waves were much bigger then. So our wharf has withstood storms for 114 years. Why suddenly that whole end collapse? If I were the detective looking into it, I would be out there, scrutinising. But as yet, we don't have the answer. And I hope that the answer will come through with transparency and honesty. Yeah. And in fact, one reason I thought it was rather foolish of the city to start pointing fingers is if, and this is a big if it wasn't proper workmanship, work-personship at the end of the wharf, then there'll be lawsuits involved. And for the city, right at the outset, before we knew anything, to be blaming it on the lawsuit, sort of, if they have to sue to get public money or monies back, that weakens the city's strength of bargaining in that respect.
So one would think.
One would think. That's why I thought it was not very skillful to do that.
Yeah. Were you I read in the Sentinel today, I think, or yesterday, about the city council discussing all this and that all of this investigation will come out in April. Were you at that meeting?
No, I couldn't be at that meeting. We have wonderful Sentinel reporters, I think, and I'm very sad. Jessica York's
what a
death,
tragedy, yes.
Really. So I just read it in the Sentinel, but it was quite a detailed summary of what was said, but I wasn't there. But April,
It's not so far away.
not so far away.
Yeah. And what is your hope that will come out of all of this? Do you hope the wharf will be rebuilt, or what would you like to see?
I have a bit of an open mind, but what I hope doesn't happen, but expect it will, is that we'll be talking about climate change and the waves are going to be bigger and it's a mistake to build. The mayor has signalled this already, a half-mile road going out into the ocean. So there's already hints that there's reluctance to rebuild. So I'm hoping that the community's voice will come forth on this question. Our wharf was built by a master engineer, Brunier, who went on to design some of the well-known, I can't name them all, but San Francisco buildings. We're talking 1914 to 20 and be a little bit later than that. He was a brilliant engineer, and the story is that he lived on Beach Hill for a year before he even started to design the wharf, because he studied the wave direction and currents, all of that. The wharf is at the height it is at for a reason. It allows the swells to go under the wharf. The majority of them, occasionally, like the storm of 81, I was here for that. A few of those certainly went over the top, but mostly the energy flows under the wharf. That's why that lowered West Side walkway was, I mean, I'm no engineer, but I've talked to engineers and they laugh. I mean, you put a barrier, in case the wave, and it's attached to the wharf.
Yes. Yeah.
That energy then is absorbed by the structure rather than flowing under the wharf and then transferred to the wharf. It would make the wharf less stable. Could be,
It seems.
Yes, exactly. So I'm hoping, I think it should be rebuilt because it has, it's a pretty amazing design. It had that curve at the end for a number of reasons. One was so the steamships could dock there. But also there's history to this. And in the 1960s, if you look at the Sentinel newspapers at that time, and there's a few people who liked a replica of the landmark building at the end that was going to be a replica of a building, but it was one of the few buildings that was on the wharf, and it was a sort of fish packing, the fish would be unloaded and packed there. And for a number of reasons, the pilings under that building rotted out and their big cooler helped rot it from the top. So the question in the 60s, early 60s it was we had to get rid of this big building and the pilings have to go. And the city, I believe city council at the time, they wanted to we're faced with a sort of history repeats itself, second time has passed. We're faced with the same dilemma. And there was, people can look this up and read the history, there was a lot of discussion backwards and forwards. City wanted not to rebuild the end. And I might be wrong, so don't quote me, but I thought it was Mario Stagnaro who led the voice of the wharf businesses to, not all businesses may have been in favour, to rebuild the end of the wharf. And so funds came from a state agency. And the idea was that it would be those they were originally fishing holes, not sea line viewing holes, but it would be mostly fishing at the end of the wharf. So if I had my preference, I would like to see money raised. There's a number of ways one could raise money, perhaps better than a property tax for...
Yes.
I won't go into that now.
Next time we will, Gillian.
And raise money. Look, it's a historic structure.
Yes.
It's only one of 5 it's actually a pier, but we all call it the wharf, 5 piers in the world. It's one of 5 in the world, and it's the longest, certainly the longest on the west coast USA. So if we don't keep its half-mile length, we've sort of lost a bit of history there, plus the shape of it. I don't think climate change is a barrier to rebuilding it.
Yeah.
And I think with modern engineering, and maybe once we find out why it collapsed, maybe then we can not do that again and do better. So I probably join the voices of people who'd say, no, we'd like to get it rebuilt. And I just add that one reason that I mean, all right, personal attacks at me aside, one reason I think it was a real mistake for the city leaders to start pointing fingers and the press, not the local press, but the Bay Area press, the wharf has collapsed. And then we have our city leaders sort of giving doom and gloom scenarios. It might be weeks, it could be months before we can reopen the wharf.
Oh, I know.
Well, I and others sort of were pretty sure that the rest of the wharf was fine. It was just that bit on the end. Now, obviously, you can't just have a crane on the bottom of the ocean floor. You got to know that is stable down there. So they couldn't open it right away. But the businesses suffered. And I think a message might have been better coming from our city leaders that we'll, as quickly as possible, we will determine if the rest of the wharf is safe, which we believe it to be, and we'll get reopened as soon as possible. A bit more, encouraging, because sadly, I had a group of women friends, and we meet for lunch once a month or so, and where shall we go? I said, let's go to the wharf, because the businesses really need, our money, particularly the hourly workers. They wouldn't go. None of them live in Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, Capitola, but no, they said, no, it's not safe.
Oh dear.
I was deeply saddened to hear that.
Yeah.
Because that could have been, I think that sentiment was fueled by the messages that were coming across.
And in those first few days, that clouded the public's perception in general going to the future.
Yes, I think so.
That's unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I read in the yesterday or today's paper, along with this article, that the city is planning a lot of events out there, bands, things, trying to get people to venture out again, and I hope people will.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah.
It may be, as it historically has been, that it's old-time locals who always have saved the wharf businesses in the winter.
Yes,
when the tourists
indeed.
go home, it's us locals who still go and, sit at Gilda's bar.
Yes, I miss Gilda's.
Yes, so it may be the locals will need to, and I think they are.
I expect so as well.
I expect so, but anyway, and in terms of the end of the wharf, our lawsuit only stopped 2 things. Well, it was an environmental challenge, so the judge ruled that the city's environmental work was not okay. Flawed, illegal. So they had to fix it. But it only really changed 2 things in the Wharf Master Plan. They have 11 projects for the wharf. Including the eastern walkway, a lowered walkway at the end of the wharf, which I think should be reconsidered because, that I think was a ridiculous idea. But that's still intact, as are the other 2 40-foot buildings.
Oh.
And the only thing that really was dropped by City Council vote was the landmark building at the end and the lowered western walkway. That's 2 out of 11. 9 other projects can go ahead. So that, I was a bit, I noted that the mayor said we might have to review the Wharf Master Plan. Now, I don't know what that means. I had a little bit of a sinking feeling because if if false information is getting out that, the lowered West Side Walkway is critical for stability, if that prevails and they bring that back in, then we know that we do not have transparency, nor accuracy, nor truth.
Yeah.
And that would be, I think, a big mistake on so many levels.
Yeah.
If they go ahead and do that, well, there's so many levels. Not only, is it going to create problems with stability, but, it ruins the Historic Preservation Commission voted to that they were aghast, the majority of them, at that walkway. But anyway,
and nobody listened to them.
No, nobody listened to them. But
to the advisory commission.
I know, yes, and so we will see. But I think last time around they pulled a Swifty on us. They got this plan finished. It still had to go through public hearings with virtually no input from the community, apart from chosen stakeholders.
Yeah,
who
they knew would be supportive.
Yes,
of course.
But so Capitola, by contrast, I believe involved the community and acts less is more transparent. So I can always hope that the city will. Will make this not, here we have an agenda and this is how we're going to get you to agree to it. Because that's the operating principle, I think, for so much in the city.
Yeah.
And it certainly was for the Wharf Master Plan.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping they could turn over a new page. I don't see evidence of that yet, but I'm hopeful. And that we can have community input. And if we are going to revisit what's on the wharf, the vast majority of people didn't want most of the stuff. Some of the stuff was fine. If you want to expand it on the east side, people didn't have a big problem with that. But if they listen to not just the local public, but visitors. We had 2,500 people sign a petition in just over 2 weeks saying, the heading of the petition, even before we adopted it for our group, was "Don't Wharf the Wharf." People did not like this gentrification.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the folks who go to the beach. I've been here long enough and I listen closely enough. The city has never particularly liked that people come over the hill to enjoy a day at the beach with coolers and all their food and go home again. They want them to spend money. And to do that, you gentrify and you attract a different clientele. I believe that the La Bahia, sadly we lost that.
Yes.
But it's a luxury hotel.
Yes.
And so the pressures to turn the wharf into sort of an equivalent out into the ocean, I think is going to be quite strong.
Economic development
At a time when perhaps we should be living with what we have.
Yes.
But anyway, we can't live with the wharf with a bit dangling on the end, although the sea lions have adjusted.
Gillian, we have about 3.5 minutes left, and I want to really thank you for your good work. And I'm delighted that you were able to come to the studio today and tell the truth to the people, what is really behind all this. What would you like to leave with our listening audience? How can they get involved to support the wharf being rebuilt, or certainly the facts being brought out? What do you suggest people do?
That's a good question, and thank you, Becky, for this opportunity. It's a nice antidote to all the nastiness on Nextdoor and social media. Oh gosh, it's a hard one. I understand people have very busy lives, and so we do rely on our local media. I'm not thinking of social media.
Right.
I'm thinking of local media, including shows like yours, to let us know what's happening. So I hope people follow that. I do write, as do you, a piece in the local blog, Bratton Online. Dear Bruce Bratton
Oh, we
has
miss him.
died, but we're
Yes.
carrying on.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's brattononline.com, and people can, I can assure people that if I sniff up something that's coming heading our way about the wharf, I'll report on it, and also send letters to the editor.
Yes.
I just think spend a bit of time, go to the wharf. I think that's what
Yeah.
I'd like people with. There's Jeffrey Dunn has written a very fine book, and talked a lot about the wharf and its history. It is a gem, it's a gift that Brunier left for us, and all of the past business owners and fisher folk and the people who love it. So I think for a moment, well, first of all, I wouldn't believe the city when it says it's in the red. I mean, how can you say that with a straight face by including things that are not even in the wharf Parks and Rec budget? I mean that's just annoying.
Yeah.
So visit the wharf, go to the restaurants, and look out for notices and public hearings. And let people's voices be heard. Let the community be heard. And if the community doesn't want to preserve this incredible historic structure, that would be a shame. But people can be involved. It's just sort of thinking, hey, one letter, as you always say, one letter can make a difference.
It does.
One email can make a difference. Yeah.
It does.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gillian Greensight, a wonderful example of a great activist, big heart, and really following through on things and paying attention and educating us all. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Becky.
And for all you do. We'll be back in about 6 minutes after the news. Stay with us.
Thanks, Becky. Are we still on?
And welcome back to Community Matters. This is your host. I'm honored to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Becky Steinbruner, and I want to again thank my guest, Jillian Greensight, from the first hour for coming into the studio and talking with us about the truth behind the finger pointing, if you will, happening with the Santa Cruz Wharf collapse. I think we're very lucky to have people like Jillian Greensight in our community who are paying attention and who care and who are willing to do something with the help of their neighbors, their friends, their family to try to really make a positive difference in our community. So many thanks to Jillian Greensight. I wanted to, for the second hour, talk a little bit about the battery fire happening down in Moss Landing. If you haven't heard about it, you may be listening from a different part of the world, and that's the beauty of this Santa Cruz Voice program. You can be anywhere in the world and be listening to us here in beautiful Santa Cruz. Yesterday afternoon at about 3 p.m., employees from the Vista-owned power battery storage plant down in Moss Landing contacted emergency responders that there was a problem. And I heard about it on the radio, not Santa Cruz Voice, but on the radio. North County Fire had issued an alert to local radio stations to let them know that Highway 1 was closed and that there was a possible fire at the battery storage plant at Moss Landing, where the two very iconic smokestacks are from the old PG&E power plant. They've left the towers there because they are a landmark, but the rest of the power facility is gone. So what happened then was that the fire continued to smolder and then suddenly exploded, if you will, into flames I heard as almost as tall as those two smokestack towers themselves. Try to imagine that. And the problem is that these are lithium-ion batteries, that the particulate in the smoke is very toxic. So I was glad to see that the local officials were evacuating people. About 1,200 people were evacuated and were sent to a safety center at the Castroville Recreation Center. They closed Highway 1 in the area, junction of 183 and Struve Road, and the fire burned fantastically, if you will, because there's nothing really that can be done to put that fire out other than put on fire retardant foam, which we know now has chemicals in it that are not good for the waterways, not good for the people, not good for the land. It's PFAS, if you will, is the acronym for it, but it's a polyfluoride chemical that is a forever chemical and highly carcinogenic in very, very small amounts. So the fire department basically just had to let it burn. And I am a ham radio operator, so I put out an all-points bulletin on the ham radio for people who listen to that this was happening. I went down with my husband last night at about 8 o'clock because we were hearing reports that the fire had flared up so much. We went to the bluffs overlooking the cement ship Palo Alto in Seacliff, and we were able to see with our mostly unaided eye, but we also took binoculars. We could see the flames from across the bay, and that was when it had sort of tamed down. So this is a very serious fire. It's not the first. This is reported in there are 3 different battery storage companies there, or facilities, if you will, and it is purportedly the largest battery storage facility in the world, right there in Moss Landing. Vistra Energy out of Texas owns one, and this is the one that is now on fire. It is not the first time it has been on fire. In September of 2021, there was a fire. In February of 2022, there was a fire. And those were blamed on malfunctioning of sprinklers that released water and caused units to overheat. This Vistra Center, battery storage center, was begun building. The building was begun in 2020 with a 300 megawatt facility, storage facility, and expanded in 2023 to 750 megawatts. That's only the Vistra Center. PG&E also has a battery storage place there on the north side, and that is a 182 megawatt facility. Tesla has 256 Tesla Megapacks there. Huge. In addition to the Vistra fires in 2021 and 2022, the PG&E units also had a fire in September of 2022. And that was caused by rain leaking in. There was some shield that they determined had been improperly installed and caused one of the 256 units to overheat and catch fire. So all of this has caused a lot of concern. While the state of California especially is advocating moving away from fossil fuel energy to solar and wind, when you have those other forms of generating power, they have to be stored somehow so that when it isn't windy or when it's dark or overcast, there's still sufficient power. And that has come down to being the need for these battery storage units. And yet, at least the one in Moss Landing seems to be plagued by problems and fire. Now, we've all got fire on our mind, having watched with horror what has been happening and continues to happen in Los Angeles. So now I want you to think with an open mind, does it make sense to you to put battery storage facilities in Santa Cruz County in areas that are near the wildland and urban areas? Well, think about that, and I want you to consider writing a letter or making a call. As Jillian said, make one call, write one letter. It makes a big difference. And I want you to think about contacting your county supervisor, because in his last few months as a lame duck county supervisor of the 5th District, Mr. Bruce McPherson shoved through approval for rezoning 13 to 15 acre sites in Santa Cruz County to build battery storage units. And I knew there was something fishy behind it because of his urgency. Now I want to also let you know that Mr. Bruce McPherson sits on the board of Community Energy. It's known as 3CE, Central Coast Community Energy. It started off here in Santa Cruz, Monterey area. He was the main mover and shaker. Actually, it was his analyst, Ginny Johnson, who really got it going, working with Carlos Palacios and other local leaders elected and appointed to create this community power But now it's huge. It goes all the way to Santa Barbara, Ventura County, San Luis Obispo County. It's all 3 CE. And their claim is that, I forget the year now, but they will be supplying 100% green energy. It is not that way. They are buying energy from PG&E. PG&E also has some of these alternative wind farms and things, but 3CE is needing to have the battery storage units so that they can supply the customers, which are many in this area. I don't know if you opted out. Our family did. And we are still customers of PG&E, not 3CE. But 3CE needs the battery storage units, and Supervisor McPherson very forcefully, while he was in his last few weeks, literally, of being a county supervisor for Santa Cruz County, he insisted that the county planning department conduct their environmental assessment and rezone originally 4 parcels in the county of Santa Cruz for large battery storage units. Initially, there was a site in Scotts Valley that was later dropped because, oh my goodness, they realized that the site is within the city of Scotts Valley and the county has no jurisdiction. That gives you an idea of how rushed all of this was. The second one that remains, these last 3 are still now approved for battery storage units. The second one is near Dominican Hospital on Paul Sweet Road. The third one is in Aptos on Freedom Boulevard, pretty much directly across the little canyon there from Aptos High School. And then the fourth one is in Watsonville on Green Valley Road, near Minto Road, if you're familiar with that area, kind of going out toward the foothills there in the agricultural land. Mr. Bruce McPherson would not accept planning department staff's pleadings that they would need at least 6 months to really evaluate the impacts of rezoning this agricultural land, sometimes residential land, to this special use for industrial use, really is what it is, large battery storage. And they asked for 6 months. He said, well, this was in August. He said, I want it by the latest by mid-October. And the staff that day in August said this was the first they'd heard of it. Well, when the staff came back, they did come back in October and said, made vague references to this project that we've heard about. And were actually tailor-making their staff report to accommodate this project that they had heard about. That's when they had to admit that they really had no jurisdiction for Supervisor McPherson's request that they consider this parcel in Scotts Valley. But they also had some very good discussion about it from other supervisors, namely the other lame duck supervisor for the 2nd District, Zach Friend. Now, I will tell you, I go to a lot of county board of supervisor meetings, and I have observed how they often will not talk about things, will not oppose anything. But what I observed about Supervisor Zach Friend in his lame duck time is that he was much more outspoken on things. And during the discussion of these 3 rezoning these 3 parcels, they're each 13 to 15 acres, he made it clear that he did not like taking agricultural land out of production, which is what the one in Watsonville does. It's an apple orchard. And he did not like the fact that this battery storage area, with risk of fire, was going to be placed very close to Aptos High School, and just in the other direction, Aptos Junior High School, and the whole Freedom Boulevard corridor. That is a major corridor and quite densely populated in an area known as the Aptos Hills. So he made that very clear. That didn't seem to matter. The other supervisors all approved it, and it came back for the final reading and is done. So imagine my not surprise by reading recently, thank you very much to my friend Al, who sent me information about a project that was applied for, an application submitted December 17th of last year by a Massachusetts-based energy company called New Leaf Energy for a 15-acre battery storage facility on Green Valley Road in an apple orchard on this parcel that Supervisor McPherson had so forcefully shoved through before he ended his term. I want to let you know that at that hearing, I took a deep breath and went to the podium and asked Supervisor McPherson to please recuse himself because of his involvement in 3CE. And he just stared. He did not recuse himself. He didn't say anything. But for the record, I believe then Supervisor Bruce McPherson had a real conflict of interest there. And nobody, other than me at the podium that day, said anything publicly. I think it is a travesty when officials use their political power for furthering their own gains. And I think there are laws against that. But we have to hold our elected officials accountable. And I hope that you, our listeners, will call people out when you see things happening like this. So here we are, a battery facility in Moss Landing on fire. And I couldn't help but think last night as I looked through the binoculars to Moss Landing from the safety of the bluffs of Seacliff Beach, that could be happening in Green Valley Road area. That could be happening in Aptos near the high school. That could be happening near Dominican Hospital and Paul Sweet Road, Chaminade, all of that, if we don't speak up now. So I want to ask you to write or call, somehow contact your county district supervisor. And if you don't know who that is, there are 5 of them. We have 2 brand new ones on the board. 2nd District, Zach Friend was replaced by Kim DeSerpa. And 5th District, Supervisor McPherson was replaced by Monica Martinez. So now's the time to really contact, especially those new supervisors, and really let them know what you think. Contact them all if you can, but contact yours, because you are represented by them. And what they vote on affects everybody in the county, but they need to hear your voice. And the people are the 4th arm of the government, holding those elected accountable and to be transparent. We certainly heard a lot of really interesting stories about that in our previous hour with Jillian Greenside and her interactions with the Santa Cruz City Council. But it happens also at the county supervisor level, and I want you to please contact the supervisors and have them reconsider this battery storage idea in the wildland areas and agricultural areas of Santa Cruz County. The battery storage project for Watsonville that was submitted December 17th of last year by New Leaf Energy is being handled by a local consultant, land consultant, Swift. It's called Swift Consultant. Mr. John Swift used to work in the Santa Cruz County Planning Department, and he's very well versed with the ins and outs and loopholes. According to the project application, this project will have to have a California Environmental Quality Act evaluation. My guess is that they will claim it is for the public. The benefit of the public outweigh anything that could be of negative consequence, and it will probably get what Jillian Greensight referred to as a negative declaration. And what that is consultants that are paid, and I'm going to insert my opinion here, paid to report what you want them to say. They come up with reports analyzing the effects of the construction primarily, not always the operation of a project like this, but the construction. What will be some impacts of doing that environmentally? Dust, noise, light, traffic is one, but as they've done, and we'll have Jillian Greensight back for the downtown Santa Cruz environmental impact report that says there will be no impact on traffic of adding something like, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of new units and a new stadium. No traffic impact. But traffic is analyzed. Greenhouse gases, impacts on water, other biotic features, if there's something, a plant or an animal that could be threatened, primarily by the construction. Rarely I see them consider the operation of a facility in an environmental impact report. But we'll see. They're supposed to have one of those. But when the consultant feels that has determined there is no impact, nothing happening here, they will issue what's called a negative declaration, meaning we declare that there is no impact. And that really streamlines things. It definitely cuts out the ability of the public to comment on things, shortens the time, and shoves it through. And that's what I expect will happen here with the New Leaf Energy's battery storage facility, $200 million facility with a 20-year life. And let's see, 200 megawatt, I think, facility. So it's a fairly good-sized plan. And I hope that you will contact your county supervisor about it and really ask that they, at the very least, insist on there being a plan, an emergency operations plan, coordinated with the fire departments. That is a requirement that Governor Newsom put through after there were so many fires like what we're having now in Moss Landing. So there you have that. This is Community Matters. My name is Becky Steinbrunner, and I am here with you for about another 30 minutes. Now, I want to apologize right now because I did not have the opportunity at the top of my program to get the call-in function here so that you can join the discussion, but I'm going to do that now, and you're probably going to hear some voices that come, And let's see what we can do here. I want you to be able to call and join the conversation. Again, this is Community Matters. My name is Becky Steinbruner, and I want to apologize for last week. I am on the civil grand jury with the county this year, and we had a tour of the...
Ready to connect. Click Connect to show now.
There we go.
You are connected as the host.
All right.
Welcome, host. You are now in the host room and can manage your callers from the Call-In Studio web interface. Audio recording is on. Dual channel.
All right, there we are. So you can call in now and join the conversation. And I apologize for my tardiness in getting that set up. Here's the number to call. 831-265-5050. Again, 265-5050. And I hope that you'll call. I've been discussing the fire happening now that began yesterday afternoon at about this time in Moss Landing with the Vistra battery storage plant. And the news that Santa Cruz County supervisors just weeks ago have rezoned 3 properties to have battery storage units. And these locations are all in wildland areas, or what they call the wildland urban interface, where the people and the wildland interface, and the risk is especially high for fire. And if there is wind, we've all seen what happens when that happens in fires, with what happened in Los Angeles. So contact your county supervisors, write letters to the editor. It makes a big difference. So I got a little distracted there with the call function odd voice coming in. Again, please call 265-5050. Last week I was not able to be here in the studio. I am on the Santa Cruz County Civil Grand Jury. And we had our scheduled tour of the juvenile hall changed sort of late in the game, and I was not able to be here because I felt a duty to go and tour the juvenile hall. Being on the civil grand jury is a great experience, and it is a very time-consuming experience. But I want to urge you, if you have any interest at all in really trying to make government better, that is the charge of the county grand jury. Each county has a grand jury, and the jury is there to accept complaints from the public, to investigate them, and with confidentiality, and to determine whether the complaint is valid, and if so, what can be done to improve government. It is a government watchdog, and the civil grand jury is there to try to improve local government, which is county and city, but also special districts, such as fire districts, hospital district, water districts. So if you have any thoughts about what you would like to see improved, things that you think are just not right, or that need improvement, I would ask that you go to the Santa Cruz County Civil Grand Jury website, and you'll find a complaint form there. You must submit your complaint or your concern in paper or electronic form. The form is available there on the website. They are also available outside the office door of the civil grand jury at the 701 Ocean Street government building on the 3rd floor. The grand jury chambers is in the same area as the elected representatives and LAFCO, Local Area Formation Commission. So it's in a little kind of an alcove there, and in a box next to the door of the civil grand jury office door is our complaints forms. And I urge you to give some thought. If there's something that you feel has not been done well, has not been done properly, and really needs to be examined, please submit a complaint to the civil grand jury. That doesn't mean that they will investigate it, but they will consider it. And if there is, in the group's estimation, there is merit, and if there is their ability, mostly time available, they will. And those reports come out in the spring. As Jillian Greensight was talking about her experience on the civil grand jury last year, she was involved with some reports and that affected the city of Santa Cruz. Housing for Whom, which determined in their investigations that the city of Santa Cruz has no data that they keep regarding who really is qualifying for these affordable housing units. They track no data, they keep no data, they have no idea, and they have no idea how many of those affordable units are actually being rented to UCSC students and not the local workforce. Now that's important to think about, because in the newspaper today, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, there's an article about Santa Cruz City Mayor Fred Keeley having a big press conference because they are kicking off a petition drive with a lady named Elaine Johnson, who works for a housing agency, nonprofit in the area, and they want to gather petition signatures to get on the November ballot this year a petition that would add on a $96 tax on every parcel within the city of Santa Cruz boundaries, and also a transfer tax when there are any properties sold with a value of $1.8 million or more. Well, that's easy to do in Santa Cruz, isn't it? With property values being what they are. It's estimated that this tax will bring in $5 million a year, every year, and that 2/3 of it will come from this property real estate transfer tax. So think about that. We're already a very expensive place to live, and they want to add more taxes, and yet cannot verify that the affordable units that this tax would support, it would be for affordable housing, that they can even verify that it would be for the Santa Cruz city workforce, that the affordable units would be occupied by people who really are of lower income. They have no records, and that was brought out in this grand jury report last June, Housing for Whom. And I urge you to look that up again on the Santa Cruz County Grand Jury website under reports and read through it. The other report that Jillian Greensight was part of was that, as she said in her introduction, she worked for years up at UCSC with the Rape Prevention Task Force and did a lot of work to try to protect women in our community. And there were many things that in the grand jury report of that was determined that the city has not followed through. They do not teach self-defense to young women in schools. There are a lot of things that they have let fall by the wayside in the last few years, and that they are obligated to do. Both of those reports were virtually ignored by the Santa Cruz City Council. But you have a voice, and if you read those reports and feel that information in them and the solutions, recommendations presented by the Santa Cruz County Grand Jury are of merit, you have a voice, and I urge you to contact the city leaders on those issues and let them know your thoughts. The grand jury has no power at all to enforce anything. It is incumbent upon the people to make sure that the elected officials pay attention to these very meticulously well investigated, well documented civil grand jury reports. The information that they present, the investigations that they do, and what they learn, and the solutions, the recommendations that they have for the problems. So it's up to the people, and I keep saying the people are the fourth arm of government. We've got to hold our elected and appointed officials accountable. You're listening to Community Matters here. This is Becky Steinbruner, your host, and I would love to hear from you. So please call 265-5050. And I think that I'm connected, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping. So call in, test the equipment. Other issues in the news locally are fire insurance. I am part of a FireWise community, which is a great thing. If you don't know about it, I encourage you to look up on the National Fire Prevention Association, NFPA. It's a national organization that supports FireWise communities nationally. We have many here now, FireWise communities in Santa Cruz County. It has grown tremendously in the last 4 or 5 years. And what they are is at least 8 neighbors. You don't have to be contiguous. 8 neighbors get together and decide what you're going to do to reduce fire risk. It's fitting that we talk about this today because of what's going on in Los Angeles, but also has happened here in 2020 with the CZU fires. And we are always mindful of the fire risk, especially when things are as dry as they are out in the woods. I went for a hike with my daughter a couple of days ago and was quite surprised at how dry the woods are here. So at least eight people get together and develop a plan. What are you going to do to reduce fire risk? And you develop a 3-year plan. Each year you're going to do this. The second year you'll do this. And hopefully bring more people into your FireWise community group. You'll have an educational event every year. And then you put all that together and you go talk with your local fire agency. For our community, I live out in the mountains, we had to go to CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE had told us they had no time. So we went to Central Fire District. That was before they were actually consolidated. At that time, it was the Aptos La Selva Fire District that we went and talked with. And they help you determine a risk assessment for your community. It just is sort of a thumbnail sketch of what's the topography, what's the wind like, what are the roof composition materials like for the houses in your community, what are the facilities that are especially at risk. In our area, we also have water storage tanks for a couple of water districts, as well as the two very large power transmission lines, the big ones that go through our neighborhood. So you just put all that on paper, and you send it in to NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association, and they look at it. They may ask you questions. They approve it, and you are a recognized FireWise community. Now, what does that mean? Well, it can mean that every person in that FireWise community gets a discount on their fire insurance policy, including the FAIR plan, which a lot of people are being forced to go on now. It can be sizable. For the FAIR plan, it is 10% to 15%. For other insurance agencies, it's less, maybe 2 to 5%, but every little bit helps. And you have the advantage of working together with your neighbors to reduce the risk of wildland fire in your area. There are lots of materials you can get to distribute to other neighbors and get them on board, because we all know that fire does not respect or care about property lines or county boundaries or anything like that, jurisdiction boundaries. So the more you can do working with your neighbors, the better off everybody's going to be. FireWise communities. Check into it if you haven't already, if you're not one already, and I urge you to become a FireWise community if you can, especially those areas out in the wild, in the rural areas, or at what I was saying earlier, the wildland interface areas, places where the urban area fingers into the rural areas. And in doing that, you'll be meeting your neighbors, you'll be reducing fire risk, and hopefully you'll get some money off of your insurance. A lot of people are very worried about insurance right now. And many people, my neighbors, are being canceled, non-renewed, and are asking for the certificates showing our FireWise community is in good standing, because they have to present that to the FAIR plan agency. If you've gotten that non-renewal letter from your insurance company, I urge you to look into a nonprofit called United Policy Holders. Look them up online. They have a lot of really good information. They are advocates of those who are being canceled and give good advice on what to do. You don't immediately have to just throw up your hands. You maybe should not do the thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of things that your insurance company says you must do or you will be canceled. My community has people who have done $35,000 worth of tree removal, tree limbing, new roof, all kinds of things, and they still got canceled. So I urge you to do your homework, give it some thought, and you may have to end up on the FAIR plan, but try to do your best to avoid it if you can. In the January edition of the Capitola SoCal Times, that's another good media, local media, the Times Publishing Group, owned by a local lady, Patrice Edwards. who has worked in media, local media, for a very long time. I think they are celebrating their 37th, 38th year of independent media publishing, Times Publishing Group. In the Capitola SoCal Times for January 2025, there's an article on page 7 talking about how the county supervisors on December 10th authorized Supervisor Zach Friend to write a letter to Governor Newsom on behalf of the board, and I'm reading from the article now. Regarding the current state of emergency for homeowners and commercial property insurance, requesting the governor take immediate steps to strengthen and stabilize the property insurance market through regulatory and legislative action. The staff report indicates, as we all know, California is facing a growing homeowner and commercial property crisis across the state, and while the California Insurance Commissioner's Office continues to implore insurance providers to return to the marketplace and write policies, progress has been stagnant, with little reprieve for residents in Santa Cruz County and across the state of California. The lack of available insurance options and long-term viability of the California insurance market could halt real estate transactions and delay or prevent new housing development, worsening the existing housing crisis. Additional action is needed through action by the Insurance Commissioner, Governor Newsom, and the state legislature to stabilize the marketplace. Supervisor Friend sought authority to write a letter to the governor on behalf of the board requesting that he take immediate action to strengthen and stabilize the property insurance market. So this is a very good article. Again, it's in the Capitola SoCal Times, January 2025 issue on page 7 and 8. And I urge you to take a look at that. It's available online and also available in most places, like coffee shops and libraries and in the basement of the county building at 701 Ocean Street. I'll just read a little bit from the end of this article. As part of Commissioner Laura's comprehensive sustainable insurance strategy, final wildfire catastrophe modeling regulations were submitted to the Office of Administrative Law on November 14, 2024, for approval. The new legislations introduced requirement for insurers to increase their policy offerings in underserved areas as a condition of incorporating catastrophe modeling into rate making. Underserved areas means places that have been canceled. Certainly a lot of Santa Cruz County. And what this deal allows the insurance agents to do is use catastrophe modeling rather than relying solely on historic claims, which is what they have been held to do. It is critical that we advocate for the long-term stability and request our state partners to more promptly prioritize this issue. I encourage you to write to Governor Newsom and to Insurance Commissioner Laura to make your thoughts known on this, especially if you have been canceled, non-renewed by your insurance company. Because if you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. And the FAIR plan is not a fair plan, and it is very expensive. If you can, well, it's the plan of last resort. So oftentimes you have to get that, and then you have to get supplemental because the FAIR plan covers very, very little. So please write a letter, make a call, and make a difference. You do make a difference, and we the people can make a difference. Even if it's just one of us, we make a difference. You're listening to Community Matters. I'm your host, Becky Steinbruner, and we still have about 5 minutes if you'd like to call in, 265-5050. We made references to a little bit earlier in the program to the plan that Santa Cruz City is doing to have they've released a draft environmental impact report. I haven't seen it. I've only read the review that Jillian Greenside had in Bratton Online, evaluating the transportation portion of the review. Amazingly, they did not give it a negative declaration. I think they probably would have, could they, but they knew that people like Jillian Greenside and a lot of others, our future, our downtown, our future folks, they're all watching. People are paying attention. So take a look at that, and it is the whole downtown area where the tent is for the Warriors Stadium. All of that area would actually be demolished and built up into high-rise apartments and a big covered stadium for the Warriors games and lots of other things. It is, again, smacking of the economic development people running the show. And if we want to preserve the character of our communities, we've got to speak up. Because while Santa Cruz City is well above its required number of affordable units that the state has now mandated be built in the next 8 years, they're still pushing for luxury hotels and, as Jillian Greenside said, gentrifying the area. It is inevitable that the area will change, but how it changes and what is left after the change is up to you and me to really make our voices heard as much and as often as we can. Where do you find the information? That's always a good question. I recommend that you read Jillian Greenside's reviews in the Bratton Online and read the local newspapers. Try to listen to a city council meeting or a county supervisor meeting. You can find them there. They're all recorded thanks to community television, which we share space with here at Satellite Work and Digital Media Center. Many thanks to the Media Center for having us here in community television. But do your best. Pick one thing that really matters to you. Make that your goal, maybe this year, to pick one thing that really matters, that you really care about, and just start watching it. Just start learning about it. And if there's something that you feel is not right, write a letter, make a call, or submit a complaint to the Santa Cruz County Civil Grand Jury and ask for an investigation. It's up to us, and if you care, find some time to do it. This is Community Matters. I am honored to be your host. My name is Becky Steinbrunner, and we will be back next week. I have not yet got a confirmed guest, but I think you're really going to like it. And we'll have a regular feature here the last Friday of every month, inviting Chris Kirby, who left the area, moved to Oregon, letting us know what is life like there. Oh, shoot.